It is kind of late right now, but I'm known to have a bit of a sweet tooth, so I thought it would be fun to bake chocolate chip cookies and to make a video of it. So let's get started. So you'll need 1¼ cup of all-purpose flour, 1/3 cup of brown sugar, 1/3 cup of white sugar, 1 stick of unsalted butter at room temperature, 1 large egg, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1 cup of chocolate chips. I like to add about a teaspoon to a tablespoon of peanut butter to my cookies. That's completely optional. 1/2 cup of crushed pecans. I haven't crushed them yet because I like to roast them in the oven first before I crush them. And these pecans actually came from my grandfather's pecan tree that he has in his backyard. He lives out of state, and just about every year he always gives us fresh pecans. So we have all of our ingredients right here. If you'd like to follow along and bake your own batch of cookies, you can follow along with me. Oh, Designing Women's on. I'll watch it while I'm baking.
I forgot. I got kind of hung up at the bookstore. Has Judy gotten back from the mall yet? She still has to sign those invoices.
Really?
Yeah, I always loved how the women dressed on the show. They dressed in really nice clothes. But when I was little, this show was on, and I always thought that they were fashion designers, but they were actually interior designers, not fashion designers.
Charlene, you make me sound like a cocker spaniel.
But Julia was always my favorite.
I just might want to go off to some South Sea island and lie around.
Ladies, this is how it's done. This is how you carry yourself with class.
Several well-built, scantily clad native boys fan me with palm fronts.
Julia?
Oh, she's just being cranky.
All right, back to baking. All right, so we're going to start with adding our sugar. That's the brown sugar and the white sugar. Sugar bakers. All right, so we used all of the butter. We're going to use all of it because the recipe calls for all 8 tablespoons. And now for the fun part. We're going to mix our sugar and butter. This mixer is older than I am. I think it's from the 70s. Notice how it's green. I need to find a way to glue this down. It's coming off. All right, let's get started. Sugar bakers. All right, all done. And next we're going to add our egg. This is 1 large egg. Make sure not to get any shells in. We don't want that. Time to mix again. So in a separate bowl, we're going to add the 1¼ cup of flour. And this is all-purpose flour. 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. half a teaspoon of salt. And we're going to whisk the flour, salt, and baking soda mixture, like so. Next, we're going to add the flour and baking soda and salt mixture to the sugar and butter with vanilla mixture. And I think it's probably best if we add a little bit at a time as we blend it together. And we're going to add about a tablespoon of peanut butter before we add the chocolate chips. I think that should be good. Here we go. All right, so now we're going to whisk everything together. We'll no longer need the blender at this point. All right, so these are the pecans that I cracked earlier today. This is more than half a cup, but I'm going to roast these in the oven for about 5 to 10 minutes. That should be okay, but with these you want to watch them closely because they cook pretty fast. All right, so we have our pecans in the oven. Okay, so we have our 1 cup of chocolate chips here. Get it in the shot. We're gonna add all of them. There we go. Oops, still a little bit in there. There we go. Just mix this together here. And our last ingredient is going to be the pecans. So our pecans are now roasted. I just took them out of the oven. I think I left them in a little bit too long, but they should be okay. So we're going to use this tamper to crush the pecans a little bit. There we go. So we're going to add these to our cookie dough. Okay, and let's whisk everything together. The cookie dough is kind of sticky, so I'm going to add a little more flour to it. That should be good. So here's our cookie dough here. Tastes pretty good. The roasted pecans, give it a different taste. Have a little bit more. So this is our cookie dough here. So we're going to set this in the refrigerator for about 10 minutes before we bake the cookies. And while our cookie dough is in the refrigerator, we can preheat our oven to 350. Alright, so while our cookie dough is still in the refrigerator, we're going to grease our pan. I'm leaving the cookie dough in the refrigerator for half an hour. And I prefer to use coconut oil to grease my pans. So we'll just put coconut oil on it. And we should only have to do this once after, or just before the first batch. For the second batch, you won't have to grease the pan. Alright, so that should be good. Alright, so here's our cookie dough here. It's been in the refrigerator for about half an hour, so it should be pretty firm. Alright, so let's start rolling. I like to roll them into little balls. And I try to have them in rows of 3, like this. Just so that they're far enough apart so that they can bake evenly. Alright, so we have 12 for the first batch. And if you're ever unsure about how the cookies might turn out, it's good to bake one first to try it out to see if it's good enough. If it isn't, you can always add more ingredients to the rest of the cookies that you're going to bake. So we have 12 here. So let's start baking. And the rest of our cookie dough, we can put it back in the refrigerator. We're going to bake the cookies in the oven for about 15 minutes or until they're brown. They're looking good. Just a little bit longer. So the first batch is all done. They're extremely hot right now, so I'm going to wait a little while before I try them out. But they look delicious. Alright, so this is our last batch. We have 5 cookies that we're baking. After this, we will be all done with our chocolate chip peanut butter pecan cookies. Alright, so the moment of truth is here. The cookies have cooled and I have 2 right here to try. So let's try one. Pretty good. And I like to have my cookies with milk. Whoops, I dropped a little bit on the floor. Delicious. All right, it's a couple of nights later and I decided to bake another batch of cookies. Only this time I did a few things differently, trying to perfect my recipe and get it just right. This time I used parchment paper, and instead of the plant butter that I used the last time, I used regular butter, unsalted. The butter that I used for the first batch that I baked was not unsalted, I found out. And I noticed that the cookies had kind of a salty taste to them. They were still good, but they certainly look better. So let's try one here. I have my almond milk there too, so we'll try a cookie, see how it tastes. Oh yeah, these are good. I think they are better than the batch that I baked the day before yesterday. So I'll stick with this recipe. I always prefer baking from scratch instead of baking from a box. So these turned out good. Sugar bakers.